I know this isn't as relevant as the new Spider-Man, but it's about that time of year I get the urge to talk about Watchmen. Clocks and the concept of time are major themes, and there's even mention of the doomsday clock edging closer to midnight due to imminent threat of nuclear war with Soviet Russia. We go even deeper when Dr. Manhattan, who comes from a watchmaker background, evolves into a being that perceives time differently, so very worthy of a timeline explanation. The symbolism revolving around time is heavy in the story. The heroes, if you want to refer to them as that, aren't even called the Watchmen. It's just the title of the story. We get quite a bit of backstory and world building in the short 12-issue run. The masked vigilantes that inspire the characters we see throughout the graphic novel and movie adaptation were called the Minutemen, another thematic reference to time, but also a notable name in American history. I believe they were a group looked at as American heroes for their involvement in getting independence from the British. A dependable group always ready to defend their country. A name that would make these vigilantes appear trustworthy, even with masks on. Some of these members are easily forgotten, but since the first timestamps noted come from this early era of the backstory, makes sense to kick things off here. Byron Lewis, better remembered as Mothman, was born in 1912. Hollis Mason, the original Night Owl, was born in 1916. So this world is not really set in the DC universe as much as they want you to forget that. It just happens to belong to DC Comics. It's a reimagining of our real world with two changes that had life-altering repercussions. First, masked vigilantes called adventurers started popping up in the late 30s. They weren't taking care of the biggest doomsday threats in the world, like Nazis, but an impact was made on a smaller scale. Later, a physicist named John Osterman has his body torn apart in a lab accident, but miraculously is able to put it back together and return as a godlike being with full control of matter. Obviously, this having a bigger impact separating events in this world from ours. The heroes in the earlier times were not superpowered in what you would normally find in a DC comic. This is a more grounded story and timeline. Mothman is unlikely the oldest member of the Minutemen, just happens to be the earliest birth date given. One of the other teammates, William Benjamin Brady, aka Dollar Bill, would be born a year later, after Hollis. This character shows how crime fighting was being turned into an American marketing scheme, Dollar Bill being the face for a bank. Ursula Zand, the first female adventurer, was born in 1917 as well, in Austria, while in America, she would become the Silhouette. Sally Juspasek, the original Silk Spectre, and Nelson Gardner, who was Captain Metropolis, were both members born in 1920. Our favorite comedian, Edward Blake, is the last known birth date given from the Minutemen, being born in 1924. John Osterman was born in 1929, though wouldn't do much until he turned 30. This period is all about the Minutemen, and the first one to inspire them all was Hooded Justice. His first known act of heroism came in 1939, when he stopped a store robbery. He was a large, strong man, walking around with a noose around his neck, that managed to never reveal his true identity. None of the Minutemen handled the masked vigilante trope so seriously. Hollis Mason, a policeman, sees this story about Hooded Justice and joins in. Only months after Hooded Justice's successful exploit, Hollis, in his newly made Night Owl suit, takes down a violent drunk who had a knife. The same year saw the 15-year-old comedian managing to clean up crime in the New York harbor. An early start for this vigilante. 1939 was a bad time for the unlawful, because the Silhouette joined in by attacking and exposing traffickers for something I don't think I can say on this website. Mothman, using his flying costume invention, joins in, with the hope to help the little man, since he already had more than most, coming from wealth and a successful aviation business. He would glide around and fight crime, starting in 1939. Nelson Gardner, who had the most experience to actually be a vigilante through his military and urban warfare background, not only put on a mask after being inspired by Hooded Justice, but took the initiative to try and bring all these new vigilantes around the New York area together. He hits up Silk Spectre's agent. Yeah, she was that kind of hero. And together, they began contacting the others to form the Minutemen in 1939. A very, very big year in the Watchmen world. The last thing I should mention about 1939 is Adrian White, future crime fighter and main antagonist of the story, is born in this year to his rich German parents. An important year, not only for German history, but all world history. They moved to the US for a safer life away from the Nazi plots. Walter Kovacs, who would become Rorschach later in life, was born in 1940, before the Minutemen were dealing with some internal conflict and controversy. Things would go bad for the group in 1940. Didn't take long for the comedian to show his sadistic side. After a photo shoot, he would attempt to assault his female teammate, Silk Spectre, after she turned down his advances. The attack was interrupted by Hooded Justice, who came to the rescue. Eddie was immediately removed from the group, but this is the 1940s. Not a great time to be a woman. They believed his removal had to be kept as quiet as possible to keep up face, so no charges were pressed, and the comedian got to go on his way and continue fighting crime on his own. 1945 would be another big year for this fictional world, and our own. Dan Drehlberg, who would take part in the next generation of American vigilantes, was born in 45, but overshadowed by the world-changing event that some believe brought an end to the Second World War. Nukes were dropped on enemy territory for the first time ever in Japan by the US, first in Hiroshima, then in Nagasaki. This led to John Osterman's father telling him to forget about the watchmaking and repairs trade. They're a thing of the past, and the world is heading towards a reality with atomic bombs. John, being an obedient 16-year-old, listened, focusing his efforts to become a nuclear physicist. More division within the Minutemen would occur in 46. Silhouette being outed as a lesbian became headline news. Living with her girlfriend was treated in the same manner of the comedian's assault on Silk Spectre. The Silhouette was kicked out of the group in a vote amongst the team. What makes this part of the story even sadder is the leader of the Minutemen, Captain Metropolis, was also known to be gay and rumored to have relations with Hooded Justice, but there was no vote for him. During the 7 years fighting crime with them, she mostly kept to herself, with the others not even knowing her name. But with news of her sharing an apartment with a girlfriend, journalists also leaked her true identity. Not good with all the criminal activity she thwarted. One of these men find her and kill both her and her girlfriend just weeks later. The Silk Spectre had to avenge her former teammate, though they had a rough relationship. Sally kills the hero murderer and retires from vigilantism in 1947. Before I move on with the timeline, I gotta bring up old forgettable Dollar Bill's death. The costume he was told to wear by the marketers got him killed while trying to stop a bank robbery. The cape got caught in the revolving door, giving the perps an opportunity to shoot and kill Dollar Bill in 46. The Minutemen were really falling apart. With only half the members remaining, and not much value with this PR nightmare, the Minutemen disbanded in 1949. During her time in retirement, Sally gives birth to her daughter Lori, in the same year as the disbanding. We find out in the Watchmen current timeline that Sally actually cheated on her agent husband that helped form the Minutemen on the business side, with the comedian to conceive Lori. Eddie lived a colorful life. The era of Minutemen came to a close, and the new generation starts getting active. 10-year-old Walter Kovacs gets ambushed by two older bullies who attack and insult him for his mother being a prostitute. Walter viciously retaliates, partially blinding one of the teens with a cigarette. But since he wouldn't explain what happened, he was blamed. Child Services investigated his home, deciding too much abuse was happening to let him remain with his mother, so he was put in a state home in 1951. Hooded Justice would disappear in 1952, never to be seen again, but it's not like anyone knew who he was anyways. Instead of living comfortably with his parents' inheritance, 17-year-old Adrian White gives everything away to charity to go off on a journey following the path of his idol Alexander the Great through Europe, Asia, and the Middle East in 1956. Back in America during the late 50s, John Osterman was graduating from Princeton with a PhD in atomic physics. Adrian would complete his journey by 58 with the new identity Ozymandias, set on saving the world by fighting crime. He looked into the disappearance or death of Hooded Justice and is attacked by the comedian who was able to defeat him. Adrian later in life hints at the comedian killing Hooded Justice during a mission that was meant to only locate him. Makes sense considering he interrupted that attack on Silk Spectre all those years ago. The comedian, being a government-sanctioned agent now, would have to report Hooded Justice as missing if he wanted to get away with murdering him without cause, and that's what he did. Adrian's defeat to the comedian hurt him deeply, and would hold that grudge up until the current story. That brings us to 1959, where reality would change. While working at a research lab, John gets locked into an intrinsic field chamber and is torn to pieces when it turns on, all while his girlfriend and co-worker looked on. Over the span of 3 months, strange occurrences kept happening in the Arizona lab, until he was able to fully put his body back together using his newly acquired powers of matter manipulation. With his new blue body, John began to perceive time differently. Past, present, and future all happened at once for him, and he did nothing to change what was to come. His existence alone propelled all fields of science and technology forward from then on. In 1960, the US government scrambled to make John a costume adventurer with his suit and epithet and everything. He would be called Dr. Manhattan, to remind enemy countries of the Manhattan Project that devastated Japan. During a fundraiser in 1960, the remaining notable adventurers, including the newly introduced Doc, Night Owl notices his old pal Mothman always has some alcohol in his hand and is becoming incoherent. As a gift, Mothman buys Night Owl an auto repair shop since they were getting older, and Hollis never had the same kind of money that Byron did. But soon after, Byron would be admitted to a mental institute where he would remain for the rest of the story. One of the everyday advancements, created through John Osterman's transformation, was fluid that moved within fabric. Walter Kovacs had been working in the clothing industry as a manual laborer when one of the new special ordered fabrics wasn't purchased by the customer Kitty Genovese. If you recognize this name, you'll probably know about the tragic, real-life incident that took place in the 60s. The woman was assaulted outside her apartment as her neighbors looked on and did nothing to stop the murder. After reading about it in the paper, 2 years after she left the fabric at the shop, Walter would turn it into a mask, pushed by the horrific story to bring down the worst humanity has to offer. In 1964, Rorschach became a vigilante. Right around the time Walter got his hands on the fabric in 1962, Dan Drehlberg becomes Night Owl after asking for Hollis' blessings to take on the name. The two, Rorschach and Night Owl, team up for the first time in 1965 to take on criminals. Captain Metropolis sees this new generation of competent adventurers and attempts to recreate the Minutemen, this time with the name Crime Busters in mind. The meeting doesn't go as well as he hoped, with the comedian shitting on his whole plan in 1966. So this generation never really formed a group. No Crime Busters, no Watchmen. It was just a proposed idea by an aging hero. Nelson retires soon after as Captain Metropolis. The meeting does lead to Laurie, the new Silk Spectre, meeting John for the first time. They go on patrol together, where John would cheat on his aging girlfriend. John was now immortal as Dr. Manhattan and would never age. His girlfriend left him, and John began dating Laurie. 3 years later, John clearly started caring less because he reveals his identity to the world after his father dies. I guess he only kept it up for so long in case someone would try and hurt his dad to get to him. That sad Vietnam War scene where Doc spectates the comedian killing his own pregnant baby mama happens in 1971. Unlike our world, Dr. Manhattan was able to bend Vietnam to a surrender to the US in only 2 months. In 1974, Captain Metropolis is decapitated in a car accident. Kinda graphic, I know. Though aging, the comedian was still going strong. Over the years, he had a few costume changes to add more protection after some injuries, but he was still brutal as ever. After a 17-year run as a vigilante, Adrian White retires as Ozymandias in 1975. This year also saw what Walter Kovacs refers to the true birth of Rorschach, after a 6-year-old is kidnapped and brutally murdered. In a first in fake American history, Richard Nixon is elected to a 3rd presidential term in 1976. He's not the same embarrassment that he is in real American history. The dominant Vietnam victory, thanks to Dr. Manhattan, exploded his popularity. Even when the main story begins over a decade later, Nixon is still in power. The new generation, minus Ozymandias, were beginning to threaten police forces' job security throughout the US. The police strike of 1977 had them saying, "Let's see the vigilantes do their job." Riots sprung up that needed to be put down by Dr. Manhattan and the others. And while the comedian was fighting back some protesters, we see the word Watchmen for the first time in the story. Just a background graffiti piece saying, "Who watches the Watchmen?" The government responded with something called the Keene Act, a bill outlining costumed vigilantism, unless they were government sanctioned. The only 2 people being their trump card Dr. Manhattan and the comedian. Night Owl 2 and Laurie put this life behind them for a while, but Rorschach had no intentions on stopping. His resolve was just as strong. His response to the bill was throwing a rapist's corpse in front of a police station with a note saying "never" on his chest. In 1978, he would be wanted by the FBI. For years, up until the comic storyline begins, Dr. Manhattan occupied his time with military research with Laurie by his side. Then in 1985, it all begins. The story takes place at the exact time period Alan Moore and artist Dave Gibbons were wrapping up this timeless comic. This is why the threat of Soviet Russia is such a heavy theme in the story. Watchmen begins with Edward Blake, who very few knew was the comedian being thrown out of his high-rise window to his death after a break-in. We later learn that months prior, Eddie stumbled upon Adrian White's secret island, where he was planning a dark save-the-world plot where millions would be killed in hopes of preventing nuclear war. The world would come together if an alien squid was just dropped onto New York. Adrian was the one to finally best the man he hated most, and the story goes on from there. It all goes down within a couple of weeks in late October, early November of '85. While I won't go over every big moment from the main timeline story, I can't skip on Dr. Manhattan leaving Earth on November 2nd to start some life in another galaxy he sees fit. He lost all connection to Earth. DC Comics have tried to bring the Doc back into their universe because of Watchmen's success and popularity against writer Alan Moore's wishes, and even HBO tried their hand on a sequel taking place in 2009. I've checked out both at the time of their releases, and they started off interesting, but couldn't land a solid ending worthy of the Watchmen name, so no point of adding them on the timeline if Moore says the story ends with Doc leaving. It was fun going back, cracking open the graphic novel to make this video, so every one of you who clicked on this niche topic is appreciated. I don't talk about Watchmen much, but there are a few other timelines on the channel to check out if you're in the mood. I'll leave a link for the one on Dune. Thanks for watching. I'll see y'all soon when I finish up this Wheel of Time discussion.